I used to work the night shift at a large suburban shopping mall. During the day, the place was always packed with people. Bright lights everywhere, music echoing through the corridors. But once the mall closed, it became something else entirely. Because of my child's school schedule, I chose to work nights so I could be there during the day to drop them off and pick them up. Every night, after the last customers left, the metal security gates were pulled down one by one, and most of the lights were turned off, leaving only a dim yellow glow in a few main hallways. In a mall that massive, only a handful of people remained. A security guard on the ground floor, a few warehouse and cleaning staff, and me, restocking shelves in a large store tucked deep inside the building. That night was especially cold. Around 10 p.m., there were still a few people wandering through the mall, mostly late shoppers or people trying to escape the cold. But as the hours passed, the space grew unnervingly quiet. Footsteps echoed far down the corridors, and even the smallest sound carried. While I was bent over organizing shelves, the sudden feeling of being watched washed over me. I looked up and saw a man standing at the far end of the hallway outside the store. He didn't come in. He just stood there, staring straight at me. When I looked back at him, he pretended to browse a nearby shelf. He had messy, curly hair, an awkward way of moving, and a black backpack that looked unnaturally swollen, stretched tight as if it was packed full of something heavy. A few minutes later, he walked closer and asked me for directions to another store in the mall. I pointed toward the escalators and assumed that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. About 10 minutes later, after I had moved to another section of the store, I saw him again. The same backpack, no shopping bags, no items in his hands. He walked past slowly, his head slightly lowered, as if he was checking whether I was still there. Every few minutes, he appeared again in a different hallway. He never bought anything. He never spoke to anyone else. He just kept circling around me. I started working faster and deliberately moved farther away from where I had been before, telling myself there was no way he would still be there much longer. I was wrong. Nearly an hour later, when the mall was almost completely empty, I was restocking shelves again when that familiar silhouette appeared at the end of a dark hallway, and this time he walked straight toward me. He told me he had been watching me since before the mall closed. He said I was beautiful and asked where I was from and whether I was scared working the night shift alone. I gave short answers and made up fake details, just trying to get him to leave. Then he asked for my phone number. I refused. He smiled and said it was just to be friends. So to end the conversation, I gave him a fake number. He seemed satisfied and walked away, looking almost pleased with himself. I thought I was safe. Hours later, a coworker spoke to me over the walkie-talkie, lowering their voice to say there was a strange man asking for me. My heart dropped. I told them to say I had already gone home. Then I rushed into the employee break room, a restricted area where customers weren't allowed, planning to hide there for a while. I had barely sat down when the door burst open, and he was standing there, no fake politeness left. His face was red with anger as he shouted that I had given him a fake number. He took off his backpack and slammed it onto the table beside me. Then, without breaking eye contact, he started unzipping it. I didn't wait to see what was inside. I jumped up and ran into the hallway, hearing his heavy footsteps chasing after me as I sprinted past closed stores and flickering lights, my footsteps echoing violently through the empty mall. I ran all the way to the parking lot, and when I got into my car and locked the doors, I saw him slowly walking out of the mall entrance, scanning the lot as if he was still looking for me, the backpack hanging from his shoulders. I drove away immediately and called my manager to report what had happened. He said he would notify security and the police, but then asked me to come back because the night shift was short-staffed. I refused. The next day, they told me the security footage had been given to the police. I never found out what was inside that backpack, and I don't want to know. I was 14 years old when this happened. Near my home, there was an old shopping mall connected to a large supermarket, a place that was crowded and lively during the day, but became unsettling in a way that was hard to explain after closing hours. Many stores pulled down their metal gates. Most of the lights were turned off, and only a few dim yellow bulbs cast weak light over the long, empty hallways. That evening, I walked to the mall alone, wearing headphones with the music turned up loud, like a kid who believed that not hearing anything meant being safe. I went into the supermarket to buy some clothes and then walked through the mall since it stayed open a little longer to let customers exit. While I was browsing clothes in the women's section, someone suddenly stood very close beside me. I could see him speaking, but I couldn't hear what he was saying because of my headphones. So I took one earbud out and asked him to repeat himself. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and glasses, dressed neatly, and he smiled as he said that his daughter wore the same kind of pants I was looking at. I smiled politely, assuming the unnecessary conversation would end there, but it didn't. He continued standing next to me, talking nonstop, and when he asked my age, I answered honestly that I was 14. His reaction sent a chill through me as he smiled and said it was a perfect age, old enough to be mature, but still very young. Then he asked for my name, and out of politeness, I told him. He said it was his favorite name for a daughter, and that was when I started to feel uncomfortable. He asked what school I went to and where I lived, and at that point, I began to lie, saying I was just visiting relatives and didn't live nearby. But he wouldn't stop. He said he had seen me at that mall before and asked if I was sure I didn't live close by, and that comment genuinely scared me. I left the store and walked quickly toward the mall's main hallway, which was almost completely closed by then, with only a few people remaining, mostly cleaning staff, metal gates pulled down, and dim lights reflecting off the cold tiled floor. I thought I had lost him, but as I passed a lingerie store, I saw him sitting on a bench in the mall as if he were waiting for someone, and when our eyes met, I immediately looked away and walked faster. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned around, he was following me. I panicked and called my mom, trying to keep my voice calm, and she told me to go into a store that still had people inside and stand where it was as crowded as possible. I ran into a small store that hadn't fully closed yet, my heart racing as I stood near the cashier, hoping he would leave, but he didn't. He stood outside the glass entrance, staring in, then stepped closer and softly called my name as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. I felt sick with fear and told the cashier that the man outside was following me, and when a few nearby customers turned to look, his expression immediately changed. He turned around and disappeared into the dark hallways of the mall. A couple standing nearby stayed with me until my mother arrived to pick me up. And that night, as I left the shopping mall, I looked back at the dark corridors behind the metal gates and realized something terrifying. Not every place that feels safe during the day is safe after nightfall. After that incident, I never returned to that mall alone, and for a long time, I avoided it even when going with friends. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted, but I know one thing for certain. If I hadn't asked for help in time that night, everything could have turned out very differently. I was 24 years old at the time. My main job wasn't enough to cover rent, so I took on night shifts at a large shopping mall, a place that was always crowded during the day, but turned into a cold maze of dark hallways and metal gates after closing hours. I worked different positions, including cashier, fitting rooms, and sometimes assisting with after-hours patrols inside the mall. That night, I was assigned to check closed stores and make sure no customers were left behind. As I was walking down a quiet hallway, someone suddenly tapped me lightly on the back. I turned around and saw Casey, my ex-girlfriend. She smiled brightly, acting cheerful, as if we had simply run into each other after a normal date, while I stood frozen. Casey didn't live anywhere near there, and I had never told her I was working at that mall. When I asked why she was there, she said she had heard from a mutual friend that I worked night shifts. I knew that couldn't be true, because after we broke up, I had cut off all contact, and no one in my friend group still spoke to her. The atmosphere between us quickly grew tense. I told her directly that showing up at my workplace like this wasn't normal, and asked her to leave because the mall was about to close completely. Her expression changed, her smile disappearing, as she said I was cruel for cutting off all contact, and that I didn't have the right to disappear like that. I told her I was seeing someone else, that I needed to get back to work, and that she had to leave the mall immediately. But Casey didn't leave. I walked into a staff-only area, a narrow hallway restricted to employees, assuming she wouldn't dare follow me. But I was wrong. Around 11 p.m., the mall fully closed, the metal gates pulled down, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the dim green glow of emergency lights. I finished my shift and headed to the employee parking lot behind the mall. It was cold and nearly empty. I went straight back to my small nearby apartment, trying to forget the uncomfortable encounter. That night, I didn't sleep for long. I woke up with a strong sense that something was wrong. My bedroom door was slightly open, even though I was certain I had closed it. I stepped into the living room and saw that the front door was unlocked. I looked outside toward the parking lot and saw my roommate's car still there, knowing he was asleep. I checked the spot where we kept the spare key hidden outside, and it was gone. In that moment, I knew exactly who had been inside. I went into the kitchen and noticed the largest knife from the knife block was missing, and my heart felt like it was going to explode. I quietly returned to the bedroom, my hands shaking, and as I touched the doorknob, I heard soft breathing coming from inside. I slammed the door shut from the outside and screamed for my roommate. Immediately, something slammed hard against the door from the other side. Casey's voice came through, crying as she said, "Please, I just want to talk." She tried to pull the door open, while I used all my strength to hold the handle shut. My roommate woke up and called the police while I held the door, my hands numb and my legs nearly giving out. After a few minutes, the pounding stopped, and Casey was sobbing inside the room. When the police arrived, they ordered her to drop the knife before opening the door, and she was handcuffed on the spot. Later, I learned that Casey had been following me for days, knew my exact schedule at the mall, and had used the spare key to break into the apartment. She was charged with aggravated unlawful entry and sentenced to prison. And I didn't even have to personally press charges because the case was serious enough for the state to handle it. That night, I sat alone in the empty apartment, thinking about something that made my blood run cold. Sometimes, the most dangerous place isn't a dark hallway in a shopping mall, but the person who once told you they loved you. I moved away not long after that, and I never worked another night shift at a shopping mall again. I used to work as a night shift janitor at a large shopping mall. My shift started after 11 p.m., when the familiar announcement echoed through the hallways, saying that the mall was now closed and all customers needed to leave the premises. After that announcement, stores pulled down their metal gates one by one. Most of the lights were turned off, and only dim green emergency lighting remained, barely enough to see the walkways. A shopping mall spanning thousands of square meters suddenly felt empty and unnervingly cold. That night, there were only 3 people inside the entire building. Me, a security guard on the ground floor, and a night manager. I was assigned to clean the upper-level corridors, where the movie theater was located and where many stores had closed early. Just before midnight, as I was pushing my cleaning cart, I heard footsteps behind me. I assumed it was the security guard and didn't turn around, but the footsteps stopped whenever I stopped, and when I started moving again, they followed. I turned around, and the hallway was completely empty. I told myself the sound was probably echoing from a lower floor, because malls at night make all kinds of strange noises. Then I noticed a store at the end of the hallway, with its door slightly open. I was certain every store in that area had been fully closed, so I walked closer and saw a faint light inside. Not emergency lighting, but a weak yellow glow. I called out loudly, asking if anyone was inside and reminding them that the mall was already closed, but there was no response. I was about to walk away when the door slowly opened wider, and inside I saw a man standing with his back to me, wearing a long black coat, his face hidden. I warned him that I would call security if he didn't leave, but he didn't turn around and only replied softly that he was almost finished. The calmness of his voice made my skin crawl, as if he had been there for a long time and wasn't worried about being discovered at all. I stepped back and tried to radio the security guard, but the walkie-talkie only crackled with static, as if there was no signal at all. Reception upstairs was usually weak, but never this bad. When I looked up again, the man was gone. I decided to leave the area immediately, but after walking a few dozen meters, I heard the sound of metal scraping slowly and heavily across the floor behind me. I turned around and saw the man again, pushing a large utility cart covered with a black tarp. The tarp didn't fully conceal what was underneath, and under the emergency lights, I saw a human hand hanging out from the side, completely motionless. I froze. For the first time, the man looked directly at me, his face pale, his eyes sunken, with no hint of panic at all. He told me not to make any noise and said that no one would hear me anyway. I ran. I sprinted down the long corridor, slipped on the freshly cleaned floor, fell hard, but forced myself back up, while behind me the sound of wheels grew faster, no longer slow and deliberate. I ran down the stairwell, shouting into the radio, even though it was still full of static, and when I reached the main lobby, the security guard and the manager finally appeared. When they rushed back to the upper hallway, the store was completely locked. There was no light inside, no cart, and no man. Later, the security footage was reviewed. On one camera, they saw me running in panic, and behind me, there was no one at all. But on another camera, further down the hallway, they saw something that made everyone fall silent. A utility cart covered with a black tarp being pushed down the corridor, with a human hand hanging out from underneath, completely still. The man was never found, and according to records, that store had been vacant for over 5 years. I quit my job immediately after that night, and even now, whenever I hear the words, "The shopping mall is now closed," I feel a chill run through me, because sometimes there are people who never intend to leave.